Good morning. Welcome to the Point. On Friday of this past week, Governor Whitmer gave her latest update on the battle against COVID-19. Here's part of what she had to say.
I signed an executive order to establish a Return to Learn Advisory Council to gather the critical feedback from our educators, administrators, and other important voices to inform how we build this framework for reopening the schools. It's crucial that as we think about how this virus can impact our schools in the fall, our students and parents and educators, that they've got input as to what this could look like and what it should look like. So the council will perform outreach to ensure the voice of stakeholders are included in the discussion, ensuring that the experts in public health, pediatrics, and epidemiology are informing the discussion as well. This input will be shared with key government officials as we finalize the roadmap. And the Advisory Council will include approximately 21 to 25 members representing K-12 administrators, educators, health experts, and community stakeholders. So starting today, Michiganders can apply to serve on the Return to Learn Advisory Council for Michigan at michigan.gov/appointments. We're going to come together as a state to ensure that our students, our families, and our educators and communities can plan for a safe, equitable, and effective return to school.
Just a day earlier, there was another protest in Lansing, but this time the legislature wasn't in session and the building was closed, so all of the protesters stayed outside. Still, those lingering images from an April 30th protest where people held guns just outside the House chamber and inside the Senate gallery have some lawmakers calling for a ban on weapons in the Capitol. We talked with Democratic leader Christine Greig about what that day was like to be in the chamber and what she wants to see done.
You know, it was an incredibly unsafe working environment on that day. It was a little different between the House chamber and the Senate chamber. Because of social distancing in the House, we actually had the gallery closed in the House because representatives were spaced out up there instead of being on the floor, all on the floor. So what happened with the House is we had a huge crowd amassed right outside our chamber doors, and they were yelling and screaming, "Let us in." When I talked to our members that sat in the back of the chambers, they were frightened. They were looking for exit strategies because they couldn't see what was going on. They could just hear it. They felt the vibrations in the chamber floor as well. And it was very, very tense. Now, over in the Senate, of course, we know from pictures from Senator Pohanke that they actually allowed some of these armed gunmen, frankly, into the gallery, and they were looking over the senators as they took some pretty tense votes and had some debate going on. And there was actually some delays in working on a bill. And so they just had that time to leer over them and intimidate them and really, frustrate the democratic process by bringing in this air of intimidation and threats into our chambers.
The Capitol Commission decided to establish a committee to look into the prospect of whether they will ban weapons in the Capitol, except for those who are there to protect the building and the occupants. So there is no immediate resolution to this. What from your perspective would you like to see happen, and what is the process by which this may go forward? Because it seems a little unclear. The Attorney General says the Commission has the authority to do this, but the Commission, or at least some of the commissioners, seem uncertain and are a little concerned about liability that the Commission itself may have. What is your take on that?
Well, I was incredibly disappointed that they failed to act last week, knowing that we had protests scheduled for today. They said themselves their top priority is making sure that there's a safe public space for school children that come in, that the grounds are maintained, and to hide behind that they don't have the authority when we have the top law enforcement officer of the state telling them they do have the authority. When they also passed rules that you can't bring signs into the building without legislative action, that their actions have proved that they have authority to do things like that, as well as the Attorney General. So incredibly disappointed that their solution was to form another committee to talk more about this, when at the end of the day, I just am really doubtful that they will act. And when you have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, school children coming into that building every day, when you have legislators that are trying to conduct the business of the state, we should not have firearms in that building, and they should have stepped up. We are all being asked to do extraordinary things and to step up and to do more as part of this pandemic. They had the weight of the Attorney General's opinion behind them. They've had past actions behind them, and yet they failed to step up and act appropriately during this crisis that we're having right now. So I have my doubts. In the meantime, my members have put forth legislation for a long-term solution, because even if the Capitol Commission did act on this, those members change over frequently, or can change over. We do need a permanent solution through statute. So my members have already put forth the legislation needed to do that, but we still need the Capitol Commission to act now to make sure that we are safe, that school children are safe, and that the doors are open to the public, free of intimidation and fear.
The protesters, the people who were there, will say that their Second Amendment rights allow them to carry weapons. This legislation that some of your colleagues have put forward would pertain to the building and the grounds only. Is that true?
Any state buildings as well. So, and listen, this is what other states do. This is what the federal government does. So what we're trying to do is get Michigan in line with the vast majority of other states. This is not us being outliers to what's been going on for a very long time across this country. We basically became the laughingstock of the country and the world, frankly, after those pictures of armed gunmen with their fingers on triggers were in our state capitol. So this legislation is actually to get us in line with what most states and the federal government are doing.
This is a challenging time to be a member of the legislature, much less the Democratic leader as you are, because you're dealing with the health threat from the pandemic. You're dealing with the issues of protests at the Capitol. And very soon, in fact, as we speak, it has not yet happened, but the Revenue Estimation Conference will have happened by the time this airs. And it's going to find that the hole in the budget this year is going to be $2.8, $3.2 billion, something like that. You only have about 4.5 months to rectify that situation. What is your take on how this legislature, divided government, the governor, the Republicans' leadership, Democratic leadership in the House and Senate, can start to tackle what is a very big financial issue?
More so than anything, we've got to quit retreating into our partisan corners, right? The lawsuits need to stop. This is about collaboration, right? This is about coming together for the good of people in Michigan. This is how do we get back to work as quickly and safely as possible? How do we make sure that we have the correct health protocols in place to make sure that workers aren't afraid to go back to work, that consumers actually do leave their house to go buy things again? It's all about a balance. It's all about knowing what your priorities and values are when it comes to the budget. And it's collaborating with our federal legislators too, and the federal government. We have an opportunity to really address a lot of these shortfalls in the budget if we are in partnership with the federal government. So instead of going back and forth with each other, let's team up and partner at the federal level too, and see where we can get some federal funds to help fill some of these budget gaps. Because we still have priorities. We still need to have good paying jobs, and we need to have a strong economy. We need to have great education for our kids. We need to have affordable college. We need to have clean water. Those things don't go away when there's fewer resources. So instead of retreating to our corners, let's come together, partner, and reach up to the federal government and really solve this together.
This week, we also talked to State Senator Eric Nesbitt about what the Senate is doing to help battle COVID-19 and his concerns about the economy. Senator, let's talk for just a moment about where we are in this pandemic and the state's response to it. I know that in the legislature, there have been some supplemental expenditures made just this week. And I know that there probably are going to be a lot more budgetary things that we'll talk about later, but talk about what happened this week in the Senate.
Yeah, so this week we passed some legislation. The federal government allocated about $3.8 billion to the state of Michigan. The governor, I think, has spent about $70 million of that in terms of the response. This money is specifically made to battle the coronavirus and the response for it. And what we passed, at least in the Michigan Senate, and I believe the House is going to take up, is really the using federal funds to combat the impact of coronavirus. And so I guess the highline parts is money for our frontline workers, police officers, firefighters, EMS workers, additional testing supplies, $50 million more for personal protective equipment for our frontline workers, additional testing supplies, more money for child health care facilities, working to bring down that cost. And then our direct care workers will be seeing about a $3 per hour bump for the next few months, as they're also on the front lines with people with disabilities, nursing homes, those with mental illness, and then also putting in more folks into the unemployment system, helping the unemployment system handle this huge influx of individuals. About 1.7 million Michiganders have applied for unemployment benefits from this Governor Whitmer's shutdown and this economic suppression that's happening.
When you think about the state budget as a whole, we know that there is going to be a big gap in there. And in all fairness and transparency, you and I are talking before the revenue estimating conference has taken place, but the best guess is somewhere, what, $2.5 to $3 billion that this year's budget could be short, and that's going to be out of largely general fund and education budgets. Is that about right?
Yeah, the May, on Friday, so this is playing Sunday, but we're taping this on Thursday. So there's the consensus revenue estimating conference, which is meeting, and I'm on the appropriations committee, and so I'll be tuning in on that. Really, it's the House Fiscal Agency, Senate Fiscal Agency, the Treasury Department, U of M economists, and Michigan State University economists come together to do a best guess in terms of what the budget's going to look like. I'm hearing anywhere from $2.5 billion to $3.5 billion we're going to in this current fiscal year that goes through October 1st, and then an additional $3 billion in the next fiscal year. They're expecting, from my understanding, more of a Nike swoosh type of economic recovery instead of this V economic recovery like some people have been hoping for or expecting. And I think our economy was, as we know, was very strong before we went into this crisis. But there are tough decisions ahead with 1.7 million Michiganders unemployed right now, losing their paychecks. Tax revenue will drop significantly. And from the governor's one-size-fits-all economic suppression orders that went through, recent estimates show that her orders will lead to, I was looking at a Moody's estimate, looking at the highest unemployment in the nation and the largest drop in our gross state product and our economic product in Michigan. And so that's, I think that's a real challenge. There's three key priorities: get through the health crisis and help people who lost their jobs and the vulnerable, restart our economy safely so our economy can again supply jobs and opportunity and tax revenue, and three, make the tough decisions of prioritizing for the upcoming budget. We need to remember our economy was strong because of fiscal responsibility and paying down debt, eliminating burdensome regulations and lower tax rates. So we need to pursue these policies to recover and to rebuild, and that's what I'm going to be continuing to fight for.
What does that look like? I mean, as you point out, you're on appropriations. I mean, it's not like you get the whole $60 billion budget that you can reduce spending from. It's in a much smaller pool, and it's a short period of time. We've got 4.5 months before the end of the fiscal year. So that's a lot of cutting in a pretty small area.
Yeah, we've never seen anything like this in this generation or even the generation before. The economic challenges are serious. The health effects are serious, and so as leaders, we need to work on these serious issues. And so I do think that because of the decisions that were made over the last decade. For example, our unemployment trust fund is the healthiest of any state in the Midwest because we made those fiscally responsible decisions to be better prepared for our trust fund and not having to wait for a complete bailout like Illinois has to do. But there are going to be real effects from this economic suppression that the governor will not let up on. And those real effects mean that we're going to be limited in terms of our ability to support our priorities of fixing our roads, of educating our children, of ensuring our law enforcement officials have the resources necessary to protect our citizens. And so this is the challenge that we're on. Realities that are happening, the larger impact that this is going to have on the economic health, on the health of individuals, such as those seeking medical care, and the amount of depression and suicides. I mean, I was talking to a county sheriff the other day, and he says that suicide calls are up about 40%. That calls on domestic violence are up 30%. There's real effects, and poverty we know is a real killer. Also drives. There's real health concerns that needs to be taken seriously through common sense, social distancing, to making sure that we improve hygiene and sanitation in our workplaces, and encourage mask wearing and washing hands a lot more. And so we do understand what needs to be done to be able to more safely open the economy.
Up next, we'll talk with U.S. Senator Gary Peters. To the point. Welcome back to the Point. We talked with U.S. Senator Gary Peters this week, and he has concerns about Chinese hacking, trying to get information about our medical research. Senator, you recently raised concern about Chinese hackers. You say state-sponsored Chinese hackers who have been trying to infiltrate research centers and hospital records. First of all, what can you tell me about those reports? And secondarily, what from the Homeland Security Committee and other perspectives should we be doing about that?
Well, I can only talk about the public reports. I can't go beyond some of the public reports, but what has been reported is that we have seen an increase of hacking from the Chinese into sites that are related to the development of a COVID-19 vaccine. So that includes U.S. government sites. It also includes hospitals and other kinds of researchers. This is simply unacceptable. It's clear they're trying to hack in to get information as they're racing to develop a vaccine, but this certainly is unacceptable behavior on the part of the Chinese. We need to call them out for what they are engaged in. They have to stop this. And if they don't stop it, certainly I think we should take other kinds of actions, which could even involve sanctions of some sort.
This is not necessarily something new. I mean, we've suspected Chinese of trying to steal manufacturing secrets and hacking into other sites, as well as their currency manipulation and these things. This is kind of a pattern, isn't it? There's
no question this is a pattern of the Chinese government, and we need to call out the Chinese government every time we see these actions. They have been engaged in all sorts of industrial espionage over the years. We have to be able to identify it, make sure we call it out. But then we also have to take action to make sure that the government doesn't continue to do this. But when you're dealing with something right now as sensitive as developing a vaccine, when they're hacking these systems, we don't know if it's just stealing information or they may have some other nefarious purpose for hacking into these systems. This is of vital importance to the health of folks in the United States as around the world. We can't have people messing with databases that are related to developing a life-saving vaccine as quickly as possible.
Speaking of that vaccine, you recently urged the White House to be prepared for that time when a vaccine comes out, because it's one thing to develop it, it's quite another thing to do mass vaccination. What are you asking the administration to do?
Well, I have been concerned about our dependence in our supply chain on foreign manufacturers for some time. In fact, last year I wrote a report as the the ranking member on Homeland Security concerned about drug shortages and the fact that we rely on foreign governments, and particularly the Chinese and the Indians, for a great deal of the life-saving drugs that we have. And I outlined in that report that when we have a pandemic, we're going to be put into a very precarious position because we don't make vital drugs as well as medical supplies. We've had shortages in masks and life-saving personal protection equipment because most of that is made in China, very little of it in the United States. Right now, our inability to get the kind of testing necessary to safely reopen the economy is limited in some respects because we don't make the nasal swabs used to collect the sample. We only have one manufacturer in the United States. So these are already apparent with the crisis now. I am really worried about when we get a vaccine, we will not have the manufacturing capability to be able to produce the hundreds of millions of doses we're going to need here in the United States. We've got to make sure we're producing that. I think the administration needs to immediately find out exactly what we have in stock, where is the production capacity, and if it's insufficient, which I believe it is, then we've got to start making preparations right now so that we have the needles and the syringes and the vials, all of the basic equipment necessary to deliver a vaccine to a patient. And we've got to do it now because time is not on our side.
In Washington, the House is considering a second round of stimulus that may or may not make it over to the Senate. If it does, it may have a few hurdles to cross there. Is there another round of stimulus that is needed? Is it coming? And in a second round, will there be direct payments to the states like Michigan that's facing some $3 billion in a shortfall for a budget, maybe even this year and certainly going into next year because of lost tax revenues?
There's no question there are still needs as we try to work through this crisis. I think we all want to start reopening an economy in a safe fashion, but we know in the meantime we've got to make sure that resources are provided to keep small businesses viable, to make sure families can continue to put food on the table. And part of that is to help local governments, state and local governments that are being impacted in a dramatic way. Revenues are dropping, and yet the demands continue to go up. Certainly, I'm going to work to get additional funding for state and local governments. It was in the House plan, and as we take it up in the Senate, and I hope we do that soon, I think that has to be a critical element of any type of assistance going forward.
We'll be back in just a moment. To the point. That's all the time we have for this morning, but I hope you will join us every Sunday at 10 o'clock on Wood TV 8 for To the Point.